Hey everyone in Mr. Martin's IB biology class. Welcome to our deep dive into gas exchange. It's something we all do, without even thinking, but it's like super important for life. Doesn't matter if you're a plant or an animal, even like a single-celled organism.
It is easy to forget about, huh? Breathing. But, when you really think about it, it's kind of amazing. We're constantly taking in oxygen, to give our cells energy and releasing carbon dioxide as a waste product.
Totally.
Ugh.
And it's more than just like breathing in and out, right? There's all this crazy biology happening at like the cellular level to make gas exchange actually work.
You're right. Like, imagine every single cell in our body needs oxygen all the time to work right. But getting that oxygen to where it needs to go, that's actually a really hard problem, especially for larger organisms.
Yeah, Mr. Martin talked about surface area to volume ratio. It's a problem as organisms get bigger, I think.
Exactly. Like, think of a tiny amoeba. Tons of surface area touching its environment so it can absorb enough oxygen just through diffusion. But when things get bigger, multicellular, their volume grows way faster than their surface area.
So like if we were huge elephant-sized, we could just absorb oxygen through our skin. We'd need something else.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have these special gas exchange systems. Lungs in mammals or gills in fish, they've evolved to solve that diffusion problem over long distances, give them a huge amount of surface area so gas exchange can work.
Okay, that makes sense. So lungs. I remember learning about all the parts, trachea, bronchi, all that. It's kind of confusing.
Oh, for sure. It's a really complex system, but the main thing is increasing surface area. All those airways splitting and splitting, they lead to millions of these teeny tiny air sacs, alveoli. They're the real stars of gas exchange.
Alveoli.
Right.
Like microscopic balloons in our lungs.
That's a great way to think about it. And the walls of these alveoli are crazy thin, sometimes only one cell thick. That means gases don't have far to go to get between the air and the blood.
So it's like this huge network of tiny balloons, all really thin, and they're right next to blood vessels. So there's a lot of area for gas exchange.
Exactly. Plus, there's even more going on in those alveoli to make gas exchange work even better.
What do you mean? I'm curious, what else is happening down there?
Well, have you heard of surfactant? It's something made by special cells in the alveoli called type 2 pneumocytes.
Surfactant. Yeah, maybe. Remind me.
It's like soap in a bubble. It makes the surface tension of the fluid in the alveoli lower so they don't collapse. If we didn't have it, our lungs wouldn't be very good at exchanging gases.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we've got these millions of alveoli, and they're all coated with surfactant to keep them open and ready for gas exchange.
Right. But, it wouldn't be much use if we couldn't actually get new air in and out of our lungs.
Right, of course. That's what breathing is for, right?
Yeah.
Taking in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide.
Exactly. That whole process, breathing or ventilation, it's really important for keeping the concentration gradients just right so that diffusion can happen efficiently.
I remember from class that breathing isn't just something we choose to do. There's like a whole system of muscles working together.
Exactly. It's mostly the diaphragm, that big dome-shaped muscle under your lungs. It contracts, flattens out, and pulls down, which makes your chest bigger and pulls air in.
Oh, like a bellows, pumping air in and out.
Perfect analogy. And the intercostal muscles between your ribs help expand and contract your chest, too.
So all these muscles work together to keep air moving and those gradients nice and steep.
Yeah. If you want to see ventilation in action, maybe ask Mr. Martin if he has a spirometer. It's a device that measures how much air you breathe in and out. It's pretty neat.
That would be cool. Okay, so we've talked about mammals and how they breathe, but what about plants? I mean, they need to exchange gases too, right? But they don't have lungs. So how do they do it?
Ah, that's a great question. It brings us to another amazing adaptation, stomata.
Stomata. Those are, what are those again?
Think of them like tiny little pores on the surface of leaves. They're like little mouths that open and close so the plant can, control its gas exchange.
So instead of breathing like us, plants use these little pores to get the gases they need.
Exactly. And the way a leaf is built is perfect for this. Want to take a microscopic tour?
Okay, sounds fun. I'm ready.
So imagine you're tiny, like the size of a water molecule, and you land on a leaf. The first thing you hit is this waxy layer, the cuticle. That helps prevent water loss. And under that is the epidermis. It's thin and see-through so sunlight can get in.
And then there's the part where photosynthesis happens, right? All the chloroplasts using sunlight to make food.
Yep. That's the palisade mesophyll, full of chloroplasts. But for them to work, they need carbon dioxide,
Right.
right? And that's where the stomata and the spongy mesophyll come in.
Spongy mesophyll. Is it like a sponge?
Pretty much. It's a layer under the palisade mesophyll with lots of air spaces. Those spaces let carbon dioxide get to the palisade cells from the stomata, and oxygen can get out after it's made.
So it's like the plant has its own ventilation system, but without muscles or anything? That's really cool.
It is, and it works super well.
This is making me think. So plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. That's like the opposite of what animals do.
You got it. It's a really great example of how plants and animals work together in this cycle of gas exchange.
Okay, so the stomata are like these little gateways for gases. But I also remember that plants lose water through their leaves. Is that related to gas exchange?
Absolutely. That's called transpiration. Basically, it's water evaporating from the leaves through the stomata.
So it's like the plant is exhaling water vapor along with the oxygen.
That's a good way to put it. And while transpiration is important, like for pulling water up from the roots and moving nutrients around, it can also be a problem, especially when it's hot and dry.
Right. They could wilt if they lose too much water. So how do they balance gas exchange and not losing too much water?
Well, that's where guard cells come in. Remember the stomata, those little pores? Each one is surrounded by two guard cells that can, like, change shape to open and close the pore.
So they're like tiny gatekeepers, controlling how much gas and water can get through.
Exactly. When conditions are good, lots of sunlight and water, the guard cells get bigger and open the stomata up wide so gas exchange can happen easily. But when it's dry or hot, they shrink and close the stomata to save water. It's how they adjust, how much gas exchange and how much water they're losing depending on what's going on around them. Pretty neat, huh?
This is all so incredibly complex. It's amazing to think about all this happening on such a tiny level all the time, just to keep us alive.
It really is, and it shows how connected all these different processes are inside an organism. Gas exchange isn't just about breathing, it's linked to circulation, how we use energy, even how plants make food in the first place.
Thinking about that, does it matter how many stomata are on a leaf?
Mm-hmm.
Could a plant have more if it needs to take in a lot of carbon dioxide?
You're thinking like a scientist. The number of stomata on a leaf, we call it stomatal density. It can be different depending on the plant and where it lives. Plants in drier climates, they often have less to cut down on water loss.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fewer stomata, less water can get out.
Right. And you could actually test this out in Mr. Martin's class. He might have you make leaf peels or use nail polish to make casts of the leaves and then look at them under a microscope.
Oh yeah, I've seen those in the lab. You can see the stomata, like right up close.
It's really cool. You can actually see those pores and compare how many there are on different plants. It makes it way more real.
Okay, so we've talked about how plants manage gas exchange and water loss, stomata, guard cells, all that. But I'm also curious about, what happens in animals once the oxygen is in the lungs? I mean, it's not just breathing in and out, right?
Oh, right. Well, remember the alveoli? Those tiny sacs with all the capillaries around them? That's where the real action is. Oxygen goes right through the thin walls of the alveoli and into the blood, and carbon dioxide goes the other way.
So the alveoli are where the respiratory system and the circulatory system, meet up.
You got it. And once oxygen is in the blood, it needs to get all over the body, to every cell. That's where hemoglobin comes in.
Hemoglobin, I remember that. It's something to do with red blood cells.
Yeah, it's a protein in red blood cells. And it's amazing it can actually bind to oxygen molecules. Every single red blood cell is packed with these hemoglobin molecules, and each one can hold up to 4 oxygen molecules.
So it's like every red blood cell is a little oxygen transport vehicle.
Exactly. And it gets even cooler. Hemoglobin doesn't just bind oxygen, it does it in a cooperative way.
Cooperative, what does that mean?
It means, when one oxygen molecule latches onto hemoglobin, it makes it easier for other oxygen molecules to bind too. It's like a chain reaction. That way, hemoglobin fills up with oxygen in the lungs where there's a lot of it.
That's so smart. But how does that oxygen get to the cells where it's needed?
Well, the blood travels all around the body, and eventually it gets to places where there's not as much oxygen. And in those areas, hemoglobin's hold on the oxygen weakens. It lets go of those oxygen molecules so they can diffuse into the cells nearby.
So hemoglobin is like a delivery truck. Picks up oxygen in the lungs and drops it off at the tissues.
You got it. And all kinds of things can affect this process, like how much oxygen and carbon dioxide are there, the pH, even the temperature.
Oh yeah, I remember something called the Bohr shift. Does that have to do with how hemoglobin releases oxygen?
It does. The Bohr shift basically says that when there's more carbon dioxide, hemoglobin lets go of oxygen more easily. And that happens a lot during exercise because our muscles are working hard and making more CO2.
So when we're exercising and our muscles need more oxygen, hemoglobin is like, here you go.
Right. It's like our bodies know to send oxygen where it's needed
Wow,
most.
that's incredible. It's like this finely tuned system making sure we get enough oxygen when we need it.
And there's more. Did you know that fetal hemoglobin, the kind babies have, actually grabs onto oxygen more strongly than adult hemoglobin?
Really? Why is that?
Well, babies in the womb get oxygen from their mom's blood, and fetal hemoglobin's stronger grip helps it take oxygen even when there's not much available. It's really important for them to develop.
That's fascinating. So there are different kinds of hemoglobin, and they all have their own, like, special jobs.
Exactly. And it just shows you how, over millions of years, evolution has gotten these systems working perfectly for different organisms, even different stages of life.
So we've looked at gas exchange in both plants and animals, from tiny stomata to like this whole complex journey of oxygen through the blood. It's amazing how all these adaptations work together, to keep us alive.
It really is amazing, and it shows how connected everything is. Even though plants and animals seem so different, we both have this basic need to exchange gases. It's like a perfect example of how we're all connected.
I love that. And thinking about Mr. Martin's class, this ties in with all that stuff about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, right?
For sure. Remember, photosynthesis is how plants use sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to make glucose, their food. And guess what? Gas exchange gives them the carbon dioxide they need and takes away the oxygen they make.
It's like plants are breathing the opposite way we do. We give them carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen.
Exactly. It's a perfect cycle that keeps everything alive. And then there's cellular respiration. That's how plants and animals break down glucose for energy, using oxygen and making carbon dioxide.
So gas exchange is important for both parts of the energy cycle, giving the oxygen for respiration and getting rid of the carbon dioxide it makes.
You got it. It's all connected, like a dance of molecules.
This deep dive has really made me appreciate, like, how complex and amazing gas exchange is.
And remember, Mr. Martin's class, this is just the beginning. There are so many cool adaptations out there. Just think about like insects and their tracheal tubes, or how efficient fish gills are.
It makes you wonder what other crazy adaptations there are for gas exchange and different things, especially in those extreme environments.
That's what's so great about science. There's always something new to find out, new questions to ask, new mysteries to figure out. Stay curious.
So we've gone from these tiny stomata all the way to like how oxygen travels through the blood. It's clear that gas exchange is so much more than just breathing. It's this huge web of adaptations,
Yeah.
that connects everything that's alive.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you realize that even though plants and animals are so different, we both have this basic need to like exchange gases with the world around us. It's a really cool example of how we're all kind of connected.
I love that.
Yeah.
And thinking back to Mr. Martin's class, this all links up with photosynthesis and cellular respiration, right?
Absolutely. Photosynthesis, remember, that's how plants use sunlight and carbon dioxide and water to make glucose, their food. And, gas exchange is what gives them that carbon dioxide and takes away the oxygen they make.
It's crazy. Plants are like breathing in reverse. We give them carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen.
Exactly. A perfect cycle that makes life on Earth possible. And then there's cellular respiration. That's how both plants and animals break down glucose to get energy right, using oxygen and making carbon dioxide.
So gas exchange is important for both sides of the energy cycle, providing the oxygen for respiration and then taking away the carbon dioxide that's made.
You got it. It's all connected like this perfect dance of molecules.
This deep dive has given me a whole new understanding of how cool and complex gas exchange is.
And remember, Mr. Martin's class, this is really just the start. There's a whole world of incredible adaptations out there. Think about the crazy ways insects breathe with their tracheal tubes, or how efficient fish gills are. It's mind-blowing.
It makes you wonder, what other amazing adaptations are out there for gas exchange, especially for those organisms living in, like, really extreme places.
That's the beauty of science. There's always something new to learn, more questions to ask. Keep that curiosity going.
I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive. We've covered a lot today, from the tiniest level all the way to how gas exchange works globally.
Yeah, it's been great exploring this with you and Mr. Martin's class.
Thanks for coming along with us on this journey. We hope you learned some new things, and maybe you're even a little more curious about science now.
Keep breathing, keep learning, and keep exploring the natural world.